Alright y'all, so today in this video I'm going to do a very quick review of a 90s comedy classic, a film that I'm sure many of y'all have already seen and heard of. Of course, we're going to be talking about The Mask, a film that came out all the way back in 1994, famously starring Jim Carrey and directed by Chuck Russell. So, growing up, I grew up on a lot of Jim Carrey movies. One of my favorite movies of all time, period, is Dumb and Dumber. But another one of his movies that I remember really vividly as a kid was The Mask. I loved this movie as a kid. It was one of the funniest movies I ever saw. I loved how crazy and zany The Mask was. It was so funny and comedic. And I really enjoyed it growing up. Now, I never really thought too much more of it as I grew up, and I haven't really had the chance to watch it in a really long time. So just out of pure curiosity, and I also recently just got into more of the Mask comic book, because as a kid, I had no idea that this movie was based on comic books. Decided to revisit this movie, check it out. Does it hold up? And, well, like all my other reviews, I'll get into my pros and my cons and my overall thoughts. But for my initial opinions on The Mask, this film was pretty great. It absolutely holds up. I was actually surprised how much I really liked this movie. And I really enjoyed the actual story, the plot, and I like the little kind of the things that tie it all together. Now, as a kid, obviously, you love The Mask, you love the zany energy that Jim Carrey brings to the role, all the crazy things, which I still enjoy as an adult. But I like the little things that tie the story together, like the mob kind of storyline, Dorian, how other people are kind of betraying Stanley. It's just a really interesting story, and I like how it kind of weaves together into this pretty interesting tale. And it's really fascinating also to kind of contrast it with the comic books, which are pretty wildly different. So let's get into it. First, for my pros, Jim Carrey himself. Jim Carrey, at this point, he was really early on in his career. He hadn't really been big yet in the movie, so to speak. He hadn't yet become mainstream. And I think he took a pretty small salary to do this movie. But, I mean, he's perfect for this role. I could also see some other people doing a version of The Mask that I think would work, but I think for the zany nature, especially if you read the comics, the zany and wild and cartoony behavior of The Mask, whoever wears it, Jim Carrey was born for this role. And he just is so manic and his expression filled faces and impressions, and really how his face can distort and how animated he can be. He's perfect for a character like The Mask. I mean, it's kind of like Robert Downey Jr. with Iron Man or a lot of other roles. He's just perfect, and Jim Carrey is hilarious in this movie. There was many points that I was laughing out loud. I think the funniest joke for me, and this is something I'm sure I didn't pick up as a kid, is when he's in The Mask, he's playing as The Mask, and Holloway and his buddy are searching him at the park, and they're pulling out all these random things, all these random goofy items in this pocket, and then he pulls out a picture of Holloway's wife, and obviously he loses it. That part to me, like, I'm sure I didn't pick it up as a kid, but it's so funny. Like, they kind of sneak in those adult references here and there, but it's hilarious. It just cracks me up. And even the musical numbers are really cool. I'm not big into jazz music and stuff personally, but the manic performance of Jim Carrey in this movie and how he performs the musical numbers are incredible. He's just really fantastic. And I like how, the difference in his acting style. He's more reserved and shy playing as Stanley. And then when he becomes The Mask, he's this, kind of a more zany, wild version of himself. And that's portrayed beautifully in how he's acting. He's just great in the role. The makeup that they use for him looks authentic. It looks real. Looks pretty similar to the comics as well, which is nice. And I really enjoy this. I think the story itself is really solid. I do wish that they would have included some of the work print and deleted scenes. I do think the Viking scene that they cut out, that was fine. That didn't really need to be in the movie. Because that would have probably drawn off a few other things. But there was a few other, like, they recently leaked the Mask work print, which is like an earlier version of the movie. And there's some pretty cool scenes that they cut out that I think would have added some more depth to the story and narrative. But I think the story itself that's being told is really well done. I really also empathize with Holloway a lot more. In the movie, he's like a bumbling detective a little, and especially if you know the comics, he's a pretty serious detective in this movie. He quickly figures out Stanley's the mask, kind of puts two and two together, and I kind of liked his character. I kind of wish there was a little bit more focus on him, but I like the mob stuff as well with Dorian. In a lot of ways, the Mask comics took heavy influence from mob stories, so it makes sense here. And I like the story of Dorian, how he basically gets the mask. He's, like I said, he's not really a stupid character or villain, so to speak. He's pretty cunning and manipulative, especially if you watch more of the deleted scenes. It's really cool stuff, and I like the story. I like the characters. I like the narrative. It's pretty cool. Also, every time the mask shows up, I mean, iconic, right? When Jim Carrey becomes the mask, he puts his on. Just so many crazy and zany scenes. It glues you. And basically, every time he shows up, my eyes are glued to the screen. He's amazing in this movie still. And there's some incredible scenes with him in the mask. Like I said, the musical numbers are great. Many of the jokes are really funny. He's zany. He's wild. He's out of control. I mean, the mask is one of the most powerful characters in fiction. Like, if I'm not mistaken it correctly, he's basically a god. Like, there's no way you can kill him. And I do like how in the movie, too, they give you a little bit of an explanation of the mask. I know in the comic it's left much more into interpretation. In the movie, they kind of explain that it's a Nordic mask that I think the god of mischief, Loki, who I think his soul or all of his powers were kind of trapped inside this mask, and it was buried thousands of years ago by Vikings. I think the very first person to ever discover America from Europe buried it, and I like that little backstory to it. I know it was a little bit unnecessary, and it probably wasn't needed, especially since the comic was a bit more ambiguous about the origin. But I think it's pretty cool that they give you a little bit of explanation and they kind of go into it a little bit. It's not too much detail, but it's just enough, I think, to give you a decent explanation of what's going on and probably wanting you to ask more questions. But yeah, I think the action's really good. The CGI was groundbreaking at the time this movie came out, the VFX. Because you got to remember, this was 1994. CGI and the integration of digital imagery and stuff into film was really new territory. And I think that this movie did it really well. There's not really too many shots of dated CGI. I think it's probably because of how it's shot, and also every time the mask shows up, he comes out at night. So maybe they were able to hide it. I'm not sure. I mean, there's probably like a few things you can look here and there that look a little bit out of place, but I mean, you can kind of chalk that up to the fact that the mask is so animated and cartoony in this movie. He's probably distorting the things that he's pulling out and imagining and conjuring stuff because, he's basically a cartoon character in this movie. But yeah, he's really great. The VFX looks really good for the most part. I don't really have too many complaints by it. It's really good. It's well done. The world is interesting. I think Jim Carrey really sells it. I also think the supporting cast is pretty strong in this movie. I think obviously people always want to remember Jim Carrey, but Cameron Diaz, who I believe this was her first ever movie role, she does a decent job. She's pretty good. I also, like I said, really like the guy they got to play Dorian. I thought he was really good and threatening, actually. He was really cool. Even his friend, not Stanley, but his other friend, I forget his name, but that he's the friend of Stanley in the movie, he's pretty good as well. So it's a decent supporting cast. And I like how there's a constant mystery with the mask, him doing stuff. And I like how, too, in the movie, like similar to the comics, it makes the wearer, whoever wears the mask, more and more manic and more insane and loses grip with reality because that's part of the mask's abilities, I guess you can call it. The more the wearer use it, the more they're losing the track of themselves. You can kind of view it as maybe Loki is trying to come back up to the surface, so to speak. That's a really cool element. And I was kind of surprised the movie incorporated that, at least in the later half of the story, with Stanley mentioning and talking to the reporter that, he's kind of losing himself and becoming insane due to the fact that he's wearing the mask so much, which is really cool. Obviously, if you know anything about the comics, this version of Stanley is much more toned down and much more of a nice guy and a good guy than Stanley from the comics. Gosh. Even though it's kind of funny, when you look at the comics, there's many scenes that are taken from bits and pieces of the comic run and put in here, but it's really cool stuff, and it's very well incorporated. Like the balloon scene is a great scene. It's straight from the comic. The muffler scene where he attacks the mechanics, that's pretty cool. I was actually kind of surprised. I forgot, but that was actually put into the movie. Obviously, what's happened in the comic is way more violent than the movie. Like, in the comic, I think that the mask, or Stanley is the mask, stuffs, like, the entire muffler into one of the mechanics' bodies, and, like, he's dead. Like, he's straight up dead. In the movie, it's much more lighthearted, even though it's arguably the most darkest part of the movie, if you will, where I guess he kind of sticks something up their butt. So I guess you can view it as harmless, but yeah, pretty wild stuff. But I already mentioned the performances are great. I like the story. I like how the structure. I like some of the character arcs, especially with Cameron Diaz and her kind of romance with Stanley. It felt very natural, especially if they added more of the deleted scenes. I think it would have been even better. I like Stanley's arc too, him realizing the mask is not all it's cracked up to be by the end, and realizing that, you know, he doesn't need a mask to be a really true, like, basically be a better version of himself. He can just be the better version of himself at the end. It's not like a hugely, like, emphasized theme or message. They just, like I said, some characters are talking about it at the end. But these slight character growths and arcs throughout the movie just make it a good movie, and make it a really solid creative story. So that's another huge pro for the film, some of the character arcs in this movie. And I can go on and on for hours about the humor, some iconic scenes. I mean, this movie's obviously been talked to death. In terms of, I guess you can call it cons, what are my cons with this movie? Don't really have too many. I think this movie, even as a kid, I loved it. And as an adult, I surprisingly really enjoyed it still. I can only really just make minor complaints. I mean, I already mentioned some things about the CGI, but I think for a 1994 film, the CGI holds up remarkably well. I wish that, like I said, some of the deleted scenes were incorporated here, like some from the work print, but, you know, that's not really a huge complaint. Like, I wish there was, like, an extended version that's remastered and stuff, but that's fine. It's not a huge deal. And, you know, like I said, I don't really have too many other complaints. I think it's a pretty solid movie. I think the only real thing I can say about it is it was a really good adaptation of the comics. They obviously had to water it down completely. But I think, you know, it didn't lose its core things in the adaptation. There were many lines lifted from the comics and scenes, but I think they're incorporated really well. There's even some changes to the overall lore that I really like. And I think in general, it's a really solid adaptation of the source material. I would love to see someone, like, remake this, though. Not with Jim Carrey, but just to kind of make it a horror movie. Which, you know, who knows, they might do. But that would be an interesting idea. But that's really a topic for another video. Yeah, I don't really have too many complaints about this movie off the top of my head. I think it's really solid. I mean, I think maybe they could have maybe made Holloway more involved in the story and gave him a little bit more to do. Maybe it's a little bit of a bias thing because I like him in the comics. I'm not sure, but yeah, I can't really come up with too many gripes. I think it's a really solid movie. It's well shot. I like the directing. I like the angles that are used and the shots, so to speak. I like the VFX, still holds up. The visual effects in general is really good. It's a pretty solid movie overall. It's one of the best films of the 90s. It's a classic for a reason. And if people will tell you that, you know, it sucks, I think that they should really give it a second chance and check it out. So yeah, that's my thoughts on The Mask from 1994. One of my favorite Jim Carrey movies of all time, period. Still holds up. Highly recommend it. And yeah, that's my thoughts on the 1994 Jim Carrey's The Mask. All right, peace, y'all.